Our wedding night was a perfect dream under a canopy of fairy lights, until the blinding glare of a police cruiser and an officer's sneer shattered the illusion, revealing the darkness lurking beneath our quiet new town. The scent of lilac and fresh-cut grass hung in the air, a perfect perfume for a perfect evening. My wife, Sarah God, it felt good to think that was laughing, her head thrown back as her cousin told a terrible joke. Her dress, a simple, elegant ivory, seemed to glow under the strings of fairy lights we'd spent the whole week hanging in the big oak tree in our new backyard. This was it. This was the dream we'd moved to this quiet little town of Maple Creek for. A fresh start, a home of our own, and a life built together, away from the noise and chaos of the city. We were the new black family in a town that was, admittedly, not very diverse, but everyone had been so incredibly welcoming. Or so I thought. Our wedding wasn't some massive, lavish affair. It was intimate, maybe 50 of our closest friends and family mingling on the lawn. My uncle was manning the barbecue, sending plumes of delicious-smelling smoke into the twilight sky. The music was a curated playlist of soul and R&B classics, just loud enough for people to dance to on the small wooden dance floor we'd rented. Everything was perfect. Even Mayor Thompson, a kindly older man we'd met at a town fundraiser, had shown up with his wife. He was over by the drink table, deep in conversation with a quiet, sturdy-looking man I vaguely recognized from the town hall. I later learned this was Police Chief Miller, a man who preferred a simple polo shirt and slacks to a uniform when he was off duty. They were just two guests enjoying a warm summer evening. We were in the middle of cutting the cake. Sarah had her hand over mine on the silver knife, her eyes sparkling with a joy so pure it almost made my heart ache. The crowd was cheering, cameras were flashing, and in that moment I felt like the luckiest man on earth. That's when the first disruption came. A blinding white light sliced through the gentle glow of our fairy lights, washing out the scene in a harsh, sterile glare. The music faltered as people turned towards the source. A police cruiser had pulled right off the street, its tires chewing up the lawn we'd worked so hard to cultivate, and parked diagonally, its headlights aimed directly at our reception tent. The cheerful chatter died instantly, replaced by a tense, confused silence. The car door opened and a single officer emerged. He wasn't walking, he was swaggering. He was a big man, with a thick neck and a jaw that looked like it was permanently clenched. His hand rested on his hip, inches from his sidearm, as his eyes scanned our party, not with curiosity, but with contempt. I felt Sarah's hand tighten on mine. I gave her a reassuring squeeze and took a step forward, forcing a calm, neighborly smile onto my face. "Evening, officer. Is there a problem?" I asked, my voice steady despite the frantic pounding in my chest. He didn't look at me directly at first. His gaze swept over our guests, my black family from the city, Sarah's white family from up north, our new friends from town, and his lip curled into a slight sneer. "Got a noise complaint," he said, his voice a low growl that carried easily in the sudden quiet. "Says there's a loud party getting out of control over here." I gestured around at the scene. "Officer, with all due respect, this is my wedding reception. It's hardly out of control. We can certainly turn the music down if it's bothering someone." He finally locked eyes with me, and I saw no room for negotiation in them. "I'll be the judge of what's out of control," he grunted. He took a few heavy steps forward, his boots crushing the grass. He was deliberately invading our space, trying to intimidate. "I see a lot of people, a lot of drinking. For all I know, you're disturbing the peace for this whole neighborhood." "It's my wedding," I repeated, a little more firmly this time. "We have a permit for the music until 10 p.m. It's only 8:30. The officer just scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "Permits can be revoked." He stepped past me, his shoulder bumping mine, and walked right up to the cake table. He stared down at our beautiful three-tiered cake, the slice we'd just cut sitting on a plate beside it. Then he did something that made a hot wire of rage sing through my veins. He reached out with his leather-gloved hand and flicked the little groom figurine off the top of the cake. It was a custom one we'd had made to look just like me. It skidded across the table and fell to the grass. Sarah gasped. My fists clenched. Before I could say or do anything, the officer turned his cold gaze back to me. I want every single person who doesn't live in this house gone in 10 minutes, he said, his voice low and menacing. Shut this whole thing down, now, or I'll shut it down for you, and I'll start by taking you downtown in cuffs. He tapped the side of the cake stand with the end of his heavy black flashlight. A clear threat. The entire party was frozen in disbelief. My perfect night, my wedding, was being destroyed by this man's unexplained malice. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do, how to salvage this without getting myself arrested on my own wedding night. Just as the officer opened his mouth to bark another order, a calm, steady voice cut through the tension from behind him. "Officer, what exactly do you think you're doing?" The officer, whose name tag I could now read, Croft spun around. His face, which had been a mask of smug authority, instantly crumpled. Standing there, holding a half-empty plastic cup of iced tea, was the quiet man in the polo shirt I'd seen talking to the mayor. And beside him, Mayor Thompson's kindly expression had been replaced by a look of profound disappointment and steel-edged anger. Croft's jaw worked for a moment, but no sound came out. His swagger evaporated, leaving behind a man who suddenly seemed smaller, caught in a spotlight he never wanted. "Chief Miller, Mayor Thompson," he stammered, his eyes wide. "Sirs, I had no idea you were here. I was just responding to a call." Chief Miller took a slow, deliberate step forward. He was shorter than Croft, but he carried an aura of command that made the bigger man shrink. "A call?" the chief asked, his voice deceptively soft. "From who? Because my personal cell and my department radio have been sitting right here on this table for the last hour and a half, and they haven't made a peep. The dispatch frequency has been silent except for a fender bender over on Elm Street. So tell me, Officer Croft, who called you?" Croft's face went from pale to blotchy red. He looked trapped. It came in as an anonymous tip, sir. A noise complaint. Said things were getting rowdy." "Rowdy?" Chief Miller repeated the word as if it were foreign. He gestured around our backyard. My uncle had frozen with his tongs over the grill. My little niece was hiding behind her mother's legs. Sarah's bridesmaids were huddled together, staring. "Does this look rowdy to you? I see a family celebrating. I see two of our town's newest residents, a doctor and a software engineer, trying to have a peaceful wedding reception. The only rowdy element I see here, officer, is you, trespassing on private property and terrorizing citizens." Mayor Thompson stepped up beside the chief. "I am absolutely appalled," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "Is this how Maple Creek Police welcomes new members of our community? By treating them with suspicion and hostility? By destroying their property?" He pointed a trembling finger at the little groom figurine lying in the grass. "My figurine." The humiliation was radiating off Croft in waves. He was being publicly and systematically dismantled by his own boss and the highest-ranking official in the city, all in front of the very people he had tried to intimidate. But instead of contrition, a cornered animal desperation flickered in his eyes. His posture straightened a bit, a last gasp of defiance. "With all due respect, Chief," Croft said, his voice tight, "I was using my discretion. You know how these things can get. A party with this kind of music, this many people from out of town. I thought it was better to be proactive before it escalated." The air went dead silent. He didn't say the word, but everyone in that yard heard it. This kind of crowd. My black family. My friends from the city. He was saying we were the problem, our very presence a threat that needed to be proactively managed. It was no longer about a noise complaint. It was about us being here, in this town, in this house. The ugly truth of his visit was now laid bare for everyone to see. I felt Sarah start to tremble with rage beside me. I pulled her closer. I didn't need to fight this battle. Croft had just handed Chief Miller all the ammunition he would ever need. The chief's face was unreadable, carved from granite. He stared at Croft for a long, silent moment, letting the officer's words hang in the air and poison the beautiful evening. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low, so devoid of emotion, it was more terrifying than any shout. "Officer Croft," he began, "you are relieved of duty, effective immediately." Croft's mouth fell open. The chief wasn't finished. "Hand me your sidearm." He held out his hand. Croft stared at him, dumbfounded, as if he hadn't heard correctly. "Your weapon." "Now," the chief repeated, his voice dropping another lethal degree. "You are a disgrace to the uniform and a liability to this department. You are not to speak to another civilian. You will go and sit in the passenger seat of your vehicle, and you will not move until I come for you." Croft, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, slowly, robotically, unholstered his weapon and placed it, grip first, into the chief's outstretched hand. He looked from the chief to the mayor, then his eyes landed on me. The look he gave me was pure, undiluted hatred. It was a promise. This wasn't over. As he turned and began his walk of shame back to his cruiser, a low murmur rippled through our guests. It was a mix of shock, relief, and anger. I thought the worst was over. But as Croft reached his car, he stopped, turned back to face all of us, and a twisted, ugly smile spread across his face. He looked directly at Chief Miller. "You think this is over?" he called out, his voice now loud and defiant. "You have no idea what you just did. None of you do." Chief Miller didn't even flinch. He just watched with cold, hard eyes as Croft finally got into the passenger side of his cruiser and slammed the door shut. The chief calmly engaged the safety on Croft's weapon and tucked it into the back of his own waistband before turning back to us. The entire yard seemed to exhale in unison, the tension draining away like a receding tide. The mayor was already moving through the crowd, offering quiet apologies to our families. "Mr. and Mrs. Evans," Chief Miller said, his voice now returning to a normal, human tone. "On behalf of the Maple Creek Police Department, I'm profoundly sorry. This should never have happened. This is not who we are." I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I looked at Sarah. Her eyes were shimmering with unshed tears, a mix of anger, fear, and now relief. She squeezed my hand, a silent communication that we were okay. We were together. "Thank you, Chief," I finally managed to say. "We appreciate you stepping in." "Stepping in isn't enough," he said, shaking his head. "What you witnessed tonight was a poison that has no place in my department or in this town. I promise you, I will deal with it. But please," he gestured around at our interrupted celebration, "don't let that man ruin your night. This is your wedding. Please continue." He and the mayor stayed for another 20 minutes, making a point to talk to my parents and Sarah's, reassuring everyone and trying to smooth over the jagged edges Croft had left behind. My uncle, ever the pragmatist, got the grill going again. My cousin put on some Marvin Gaye, and slowly, hesitantly, the atmosphere began to thaw. People started talking again, laughing even, though it was brittle at first. We picked up my little groom figurine and placed it back on the cake, a small act of defiance. We were determined not to let Croft win. Eventually, the chief and the mayor made their excuses and left. I watched Chief Miller walk over to the cruiser, open the driver's side door, and say something to Croft that I couldn't hear. Then he got in, and a moment later, the cruiser backed off our lawn, leaving deep, muddy ruts behind, and drove away into the night. It felt final. It felt like justice had been served, swiftly and decisively. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced cheerfulness. We danced, we ate cake, we accepted congratulations, but there was a shadow hanging over it all. Every time a car drove down the street, people would flinch. The joy of the evening had been tainted, a sour note in a beautiful song. By 11, most of our guests had left, offering hugs and words of support that felt more like condolences than congratulations. After everyone was gone, Sarah and I stood alone in the backyard, surrounded by the debris of our party. Empty plates, crumpled napkins, the lingering smell of barbecue, and shattered peace. "Well," Sarah said softly, leaning her head against my shoulder, "that's one for the storybooks." I wrapped my arms around her. "I'm so sorry, babe. I wanted tonight to be perfect." "It was perfect," she whispered, pulling back to look at me, her eyes fierce. "It was perfect until he showed up. And then it was something else. We saw what this town can be, the good and the bad, all in one night." She was right. The kindness of the mayor and the integrity of the chief were just as real as Croft's bigotry. We cleaned up in silence, the simple domestic act a comfort. We stacked the rented dishes, bagged the trash, and turned off the fairy lights, plunging the yard back into darkness. As we locked the back door and walked into our new house, our first night as husband and wife, I felt a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. We were just about to head upstairs when I noticed a blinking red light on our new home phone, an old-fashioned landline we'd installed mostly for my parents' peace of mind. One new message. Probably just a cousin who forgot to say goodbye, I thought. I hit the play button, and a tinny robotic voice announced the time of the call. 9:15 p.m., right in the middle of the chaos with Croft. Then a voice filled the silence of our kitchen. It was raspy, disguised, and dripping with a venom that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "You think you're safe," the voice hissed. "You think our town wants you here, you and your fancy friends? You made a mistake coming to Maple Creek, and you made a bigger mistake getting Officer Croft fired." There was a pause, and I could hear a faint, chilling chuckle. "He has friends. We all do. We're the ones who made the call tonight, and we'll keep calling. We'll be watching you. Every move you make. This is just the beginning." The playful beep of the answering machine echoed in the dead, quiet house, a stark contrast to the venomous words we'd just heard. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored my own. The dream of Maple Creek, the perfect fresh start, crumbled into dust right there in our kitchen. We weren't just the new family anymore. We were a target. The ruts in our lawn weren't just damaged grass. They were the opening salvo in a war we didn't even know we were fighting. For a long moment we just stood there, the silence stretching, thick with the unsaid question. Do we run? My first instinct was to pack. To get Sarah, get our things, and drive back to the city where anonymity was its own kind of shield. But then I looked at her face. The fear was there, yes, but underneath it, a stubborn fire was kindling in her eyes. The same fire I fell in love with. She took a deep breath, her hand finding mine in the dark. "No," she said, her voice a fierce whisper. "We're not letting them chase us out of our own home. Not on our wedding night. Not ever." That was all I needed to hear. The fear didn't vanish, but it solidified into a cold, hard resolve. I saved the message on the machine, then pulled out my cell phone. There was only one person to call. I dialed the non-emergency number for the police department and asked to be put through to Chief Miller directly, explaining it was an urgent follow-up to the incident at my home. I didn't expect to get him, but to my surprise he was patched through in less than a minute. He was still at the station, processing Croft. "Chief Miller," I said, keeping my voice as level as I could. "It's David Evans. I'm sorry to bother you so late, but we just received a threat." I explained the phone call, the disguised voice, the specific mention of Croft, and the friends who made the initial call. I could hear the chief's pen scratching furiously on the other end. When I finished, there was a heavy silence. "Mr. Evans," he said, his voice grim, "do not erase that message. I'm sending a patrol car to sit outside your house for the night. They will be discreet. In the morning, I'm opening a full internal affairs investigation. This goes far beyond one rogue officer. This is a conspiracy." The next few days were tense. A marked cruiser was parked at the end of our block, a subtle but reassuring presence. The town that had seemed so welcoming now felt full of hidden eyes. Was the mailman one of them? The clerk at the grocery store? The paranoia was a bitter pill. We kept to ourselves, and I nearly jumped out of my skin when the doorbell rang 2 days later. It was Mayor Thompson. He was holding a file in his hands and had a weary look on his face. "I came as soon as the chief told me," he said. "David, Sarah, I am so sorry. We've been looking into Officer Croft's record. There are patterns, complaints from out-of-towners, anonymous tips, targeting the few minority families who have lived here over the years. Things that were dismissed as isolated incidents. We were blind, and I apologize for that. He told us the investigation was moving fast. The anonymous call had been made from a burner phone, but security footage from the gas station where it was purchased showed 2 men. One was Officer Croft, and the other was another Maple Creek cop, one of his regular patrol partners. They had used the anonymous tip excuse for years to harass people they didn't like, always covering for each other. Chief Miller was cleaning house. The resolution came a week later, not with a quiet phone call, but with a public announcement. The chief and the mayor had called a special town hall meeting. Against our better judgment, Sarah and I decided to go. We had to see it through. The auditorium was packed. As we walked in, a hush fell over the room. People looked at us, some with pity, some with curiosity, some with a warmth that surprised me. Chief Miller stood at the podium, looking 10 years older than he had at our wedding. He didn't mince words. He laid out the entire story, from Croft crashing our wedding to the threatening phone call, to the internal investigation that followed. He announced that Croft and 2 other officers had been fired and were facing criminal charges for conspiracy, intimidation, and misuse of police resources. He spoke of a cancer of bigotry that had been allowed to fester in the dark corners of his department, and vowed to rebuild the force based on trust and integrity. When he finished, the silence was deafening. Then, one person in the back started to clap, then another, and another, until the entire room was filled with thunderous applause. Mayor Thompson took the podium and publicly apologized to us by name, saying that the town had failed us, but would spend every day trying to earn back our trust. As he spoke, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was our next-door neighbor, a quiet man named George. "We're glad you're here," he said, his wife nodding beside him. And all around us people were turning to us, smiling, nodding. They weren't just staring anymore. They were connecting. Walking out of that town hall, Sarah's hand in mine felt like breathing fresh air after being trapped underground. The fight wasn't just ours, it was the town's. And the good people, the ones we'd hoped to find when we moved here, were standing up to be counted. The next morning, George's wife came over with a still warm apple pie. "A proper welcome to the neighborhood gift this time," she said with a kind smile. A few weeks later, I was out in the yard, tending to the new patches of grass I'd laid over the ruts from Croft's cruiser. The green shoots were bright and strong. Our perfect wedding night had been ruined, but in its place something more real and more resilient had begun to grow. We hadn't found the perfect, flawless town we'd imagined, but we had found a real community, one that was willing to face its own ugliness and strive to be better. We had found a home,